Okay, so exactly 1 year from today, the whole world is going to be focused on a little green pitch just outside Soweto. When Bafana Bafana kicks off the World Cup, it's been a long road for South Africa since 2004, since Sepp Blatter opened that envelope and we got the bid. There's been a lot of criticism, a lot of doubters, a lot of talk about plan Bs and all of that, but South Africa seems to have weathered the storm. The stadiums, we can all see Greenpoint from here, is like a phoenix rising. It's the most beautiful stadium, and all the stadiums seem quite iconic buildings. But there's still quite a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of challenges ahead, particularly with the global economic crisis. So let's talk about all of that. We've got a wonderful group of people to talk about these issues, but let's also talk about legacy. What is it? It's a very woolly word. We want to try and unpack it a little bit. So in terms of our panelists, let's introduce them. Jordaan, head of the local organizing committee. Kgalema Motlanthe, the deputy president. Thank you for joining us. Michael Jordaan, head of First National Bank. Helen Zille, Western Province Premier and former Mayor of Cape Town. And Jane Carter, heads up a Coaching for Hope, an NGO. So I think from our point of view, let's have a conversation. Panelists, we're going to interview you sort of one-on-one for the next 5 minutes each, and then we'll open up to the floor. I think I'm going to be a little bit cheeky to start off with, but all of you, when I start speaking to you, I'd like you to give me a sense of South Africa's readiness. On a scale of 1 to 10, I want you to give me a mark. This is not Strictly Come Dancing or any of those reality shows, but I want you to tell me, out of 1 to 10, how ready you think South Africa is. Now, it's a bit of a no-brainer. We're going to ask you first. How ready is South Africa a year ahead?
I think you must start in the beginning. When we made the bid...
Are you not answering the question, or are you going to take a long time to answer the question?
No, it's an international event. I want to present the international context for that answer. 2006 bid, we were up against Germany, Brazil, England, Morocco, South Africa. We were ranked equal to Germany as a country with the best ability to deliver the World Cup. It was expressed in the results. We lost 12-11. The second bid, South Africa was ranked, again, #1. So from that point of view of an investigation of technical people going through the country, they said this country will be ready. That turns out to be a reality. Look at the stadiums, look at the airports, and you've seen this. It's not something that we can hide. It's something that you experience. The stadium will be ready. Last Sunday, we opened the stadium in Port Elizabeth. Complete, more than a year before kickoff. The first match there, 12th of June. 8th of June, the people sat in the stadium and celebrated that. By the end of this Confederations Cup, 5 of our 10 stadiums will be ready, fully operational. You will struggle to find another organizing committee anywhere in the world. You can go to Sydney Olympics, compare us with that, compare us with Athens Olympics, compare us with Korea, Japan, compare us with Germany, you'll find there's hardly another country, more than a year to go, with this state of readiness.
So what's your number? A year to go.
I never settled for less than an A+.
Okay, so is that 10 out of 10, or are we talking 8.5 here?
I want an A+, whatever percentage.
I'm not going to get an answer out of you. Okay. We talked about a long road, and Sepp Blatter opening that envelope in 2004. But for you, this started way before that. Give me a sense of this journey that you've been on.
Well, I think from where I come from, you know, the first trigger was started right here when Nelson Mandela walked out of the Pollsmoor prison. It was a moment of hope and a moment of fear of this country. And it is a very unique opportunity that we had as a country to begin to construct a society in the country that we all dreamt about. Our deputy president went to Robben Island for a non-racial, democratic, non-sexist, thriving country. And from a major event standpoint, we said that hosting of major events can contribute in building that non-racial and democratic South Africa. You know, local governments were separated on racial lines. Clearly, to host the World Cup, we need an integrated, functional local government. So that will strengthen that process in building infrastructure we said our infrastructure must be significantly better than any time before 1990. And I think everyone walking through the country will know that the Oliver Tambo International Airport is significantly better than what the old John Smuts Airport ever was. And you can measure that by the names of the streets and the bridges. Measure Nelson Mandela Bridge with any other bridge or with any other name prior to 1990. So making the country better is part of that. Putting this country on the discussion tables and the coffee tables throughout the world is an important issue that we must continue to engage the country, and finally to be a place of trade, investment, of a nation that wants to succeed. And I think all of these things are expressed through all of the events that we hosted, and finally through the hosting of the World Cup.
Today we're looking forward, and I'll get to that now, but this journey that you've been on, what has been the hardest thing about trying to get the World Cup here and then putting it on? For you personally, what have you looked back and said, that was really the most challenging day or the most challenging experience?
I think it will vary. You know, in the bidding phase, of course, was very difficult. But one thing that our history has given us, that when you pursue a goal like the liberation of this country or the pursuit of hosting the World Cup, whatever the circumstances, whatever the difficulty, you never give up. You know, Steve Twitter, one of the former ministers, had this expression. He says, life is like a motor car. It has 4 or 5 gears going forward, but it also has reverse. But remember, it only has 1 reverse gear. So you're not supposed to sit in reverse. You must move out and use the gears going forward. So yes, you have setbacks, you have disappointments, as we've had throughout our lives. But we are using the 5 gears forward, and we are very happy we are now in the 5th gear gliding. The teams are arriving, we're selling the tickets, everybody has moved away from us being a Plan B country. I think now the only...
Did that irritate you, all of that Plan B discussion?
No, I think we understand, you know, you go through a roller coaster ride. Firstly, they said, you know, you deserve to host the World Cup, and when you get the World Cup awarded, they say, wonderful. And then a month later, they said, we wonder whether they will be ready. And then 3 months later, they conclude, in fact, you will not be ready. We must now look for Plan B. And then they say, well, you're going to be ready. So we've gone through the roller coaster ride. I think the only Plan B that will apply in this country now is that we can be a Plan B for the Rugby World Cup, whoever that host may be. We can be a Plan B for the Cricket World Cup, whoever that host nation is. And we can be a Plan B for the next World Cup host, whoever that may be. We are going to host the World Cup, and I think it's a comfortable
Has it been
position.
difficult working with FIFA?
Well, I think we must understand that whether it's FIFA, the Olympics, or the IOC, the rugby federations, or cricket, that this is an event that comes once every 4 years for these international federations. And all of the activities are generated, the revenues generated from this single one event. They have nothing in between to fund the operations. So they're going to milk
it for as much as they're worth, basically.
Well, you can use that phrase if you want to. It's not my phrase. I think what FIFA does is to take 70% of that revenue and invest it into legacy. If you go all over the African country, you'll find development centers. This World Cup will deliver 20 centers for 2010. There's artificial pitches, there's training, capacity building. So 70% of that revenue goes back into development, which is a key focus area, and which something that we, I think, brought about in agitating inside FIFA, that you cannot have a world federation that's rich and your nations, your members are poor. You have to shift the resources, and I must say we are very happy that 70% of the resources are going back there. I'm also very happy to tell you that when we're in the Bahamas, FIFA's financial statements reflected that FIFA today is in the best financial position over a 100-year period. They've never had it better. And the irony of the case is that this was one of the central arguments over 100 years as to why Africa should never host the World Cup. They said a World Cup on the African continent anywhere will be a commercial disaster, huge financial losses. The most profitable World Cup ever over 103 years now in FIFA's history is this World Cup in South Africa, Africa's first World Cup.
Okay. Looking forward, What are, for you, the biggest challenges in the next year? What have you got to do to make sure that this really is the best?
Well, it must be what we set it out to be, that the people of this country must embrace the event, must benefit from the event, must feel that this event truly helped us as a nation to move forward. And I think that is where we will focus, is to really get the people of this country excited. They are now believing. Basically,
you're saying.
Well, I said very often that South Africans are late believers. You know, they want to see Brazil is here, then they know the match is on. So I think that we must encourage South Africans. I think that is a central piece. It is the experience in any country that sets World Cups apart. And I think it is the experience, the engagement of South African people that truly will make the difference. And we are very happy. I'm happy to see Jomo Sono is sitting there and Phil Masinga.
We're going to talk to them in a while.
They are representing two generations of South African football. Jomo played in the period of isolation and apartheid, and therefore he could never represent this country. Probably would be one of the greatest footballers ever to be produced from the African continent. And Phil Masinga, the first generation of players who could participate in international football. So I'm happy that they are here as well.
We're going to get to them because obviously the fortunes of Bafana Bafana also impact on how excited South Africans are, and that's a whole other
And you
story.
best ask them. They are qualified to speak on that.
I don't even know if they have the answers, but we'll get to you in a while. But let's move on to the Deputy President. Challenges is a nice, fuzzy, woolly word for problems South Africa still faces. For you, what are the major issues that the government has to get over for 2010 to be a roaring success?
Well, for government, the decision to invest in infrastructure has gone down very well, and everywhere we go, we find that you know, the entry ports and airports, all the bottlenecks and hassles have been removed, and that's to the benefit of all of our people and tourists who come to South Africa. And however, the key challenge facing us is really to extend the connectivity with the rest of the continent. Remember, we at the Ayew Heads of Government Summit in 2007, it was decided that this would be a World Cup for all of Africa. And therefore, we believe that the rest of the continent can benefit a great deal with improved transport connectivity, ICT, and so that it makes movement of people much easier. Those are the areas that are
Transport's an issue here in South Africa as well. I mean, just getting people from A to B, from a hotel to a park and ride. There have been real issues and real concerns for a number of people I've spoken to about South Africa's infrastructure in terms of getting people to these games or getting them from the airport to the hotel.
Well, that's been addressed. That is why we have the BRT program. And
well, what's happening with the BRT?
In Johannesburg, it is almost 90% ready in the city.
And what about the taxi drivers who are vehemently against it?
The taxi drivers are really bargaining for the best advantage out of the program, not opposed to the program. They're trying to get as much as they can out of the program, and that's why the Minister of Transport is engaging them. And I have no doubt in my mind that a meeting point will be found. They'll be very, very happy by the time of the conclusion of the
Would you consider it a failure that the BRT in Johannesburg is not up and running for the Confed Cup?
It was actually never meant to be operational now for the Confederations Cup. It wasn't. It was just a way of focusing efforts that people linked it in order to ensure that they work flat out to get it ready. But it was never really part of the conditions.
I actually skipped my main question.
Okay.
Out of 10, How ready is South Africa?
South Africa has been ready over the years because we've hosted very successfully major world events, from the World Conference Against Racism, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, number of sporting events. And this here is not, I mean, we recently hosted, within 3 weeks, the Indian Premier League in the middle of an election. And that went off like a bomb.
But this is a different animal completely. I mean, crime and security, when I speak to security experts, they say this is very different. We're talking about a major international tournament. This is not a local Indian league or a 2020 World Cup. This is serious stuff. Is South Africa able to deal with a major terror incident, for example?
Yes, I think we will, because one of the things that you know, football does is also to cement the bonds between people, and I'm sure that once the teams, you watch what's going to happen in Bloemfontein when the Brazilians practice in Bloemfontein. All of Bloemfontein would be there, and they will be embraced. All differences would be completely eliminated. People would be...
But security-wise, I mean, are South Africa's security forces up to policing a major event like this?
Yes, yes. There will be 41,000 additional police officers deployed for this.
Are these extra police officers
well-trained,
trained and experienced?
Yes.
Because that's the big thing. I mean...
Yeah, we are ready.
How, out of 10? Can you give me a number?
Out of 10, I would say plus 10. Thank you.
It goes to 11.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you that question. Are you going to give me out of 10? How ready is South Africa?
I've got to give you a straight answer. I have no doubt that when the time comes, the kickoff in 365 days, we will be at a 10. I don't think we're there now. I'm going to go a bit lower than I think the previous two panel members and probably score us a 6. And I think that's very positive. We're people who respond well to pressure in South Africa, and recognizing that we're not there yet, that some of the stadiums aren't finished yet, that there are things with the ticketing system and with crime, etc., is exactly what we need to work on in the next year to get to that 10. So we'll get there, but we have to recognize we need a bit of pressure to do so.
Okay, we sort of been touching on legacy and this World Cup. How much is it going to impact financially on the lives of ordinary South Africans? Is it as beneficial commercially as many people would like to say it is?
Well, you know, the mega sporting events in the world now have grown bigger and bigger every year, and countries are clamoring with each other to host them. And usually the benefits are vastly overstated. In South Africa, the only study that I'm aware of was done by Grant Thornton. They said that 150,000 additional jobs would be created and some 25 billion added to the economy.
Jacob Zuma said 400,000 yesterday.
At this event, I also heard figures such as 400,000. Now, in all the studies that are done after these mega events, they always find that people overestimate the events before the time, and afterwards, when you do a more clinical assessment, it's less. So that could be the case in South Africa. You have to understand that in bidding for this event, you have FIFA, who owns the beautiful game, in effect a monopoly, negotiating with a number of countries that have commercial but also other agendas. You know, it's not just about money, it's about sport and the experience and, you know, showcasing your country to the world and clearing up misperceptions, etc., and all of these apply in our country. So I think it's fair to say that FIFA are in a position to drive a hard bargain. Now, one example where this has happened in South Africa is when we went through the bidding process, the cost of building or renovating the stadiums was under $1 billion. And in fact, the cost has escalated to $10 billion. So, you know, it's a very real thing that happens with all of these events. However, if you have to ask me, despite all the cynicism, I think that a number of things fortunately have turned in our favor. The big one is, in fact, the world recession. You may recall in 2006, Mr. Dempsey was the one vote that stopped us from getting the 2006 World Cup. It was a very sad day for us, but as things have since turned out, we couldn't have asked for a better time to host the World Cup. Many of the benefits that come with the World Cup sometimes displace other things. In Germany, for example, there were 14% less tourists, normal tourists, because they were displaced by the World Cup tourists. Now, what's happened in South Africa, it's hitting us in an economic recession. It's the best possible time to have counter-cyclical infrastructural investments. The fact that we're hosting it in winter means we won't be displacing as many other tourists that we have. Barack Obama is trying to get the United States going with their fiscal stimulus packages. And
is this our equivalent?
Well, they talk about being shovel-ready. And our Minister of Finance at last budget said, we're already shoveling. It is the most wonderful thing that we have a deadline. As a businessman, I like the fact that there's a deadline. We have to get these stadiums ready. We have to get the airports ready, and the roads, and the police, etc. And I think it's just been very fortuitous that the timing hits us right now. So overall, I think we're very fortunate, and we have to thank FIFA.
Commercially, you spent tens of billions of dollars? Buying the rights to be a commercial.
Tens of millions. There's 3 zeros less.
Whatever. But anyway, it was a large amount of money that you've outlaid to be a commercial sponsor for this. Was it worth it? And under the current economic climate, would you have written that check now?
Well, first of all, I feel very honored to be part of this panel, but now for everyone else, you can see it cost a lot of money to be here. And it's not just the money that you pay to FIFA to be a national partner, which FNB very proudly is. It's any marketer will tell you now you've got to leverage it. You've got to advertise it, etc. So it's in fact multiples of that amount. To be frank, I found it.
So it is billions.
It was very difficult in the beginning. When we got the proposal, it is the biggest thing that's happened in South Africa, arguably since our first democratic election. We desperately wanted to be part of it, but it's tough. You have to say, with that money, I could open new branches, roll out more ATMs, and at least then there's a safety of being involved in something tangible and physical. As it turned out, we made the decision, and we're very happy with it. But I need to tell you that it wasn't automatic. We had to make it work. We had to get our staff involved. For example, we had an initiative where if staff educated themselves, learned more about the business and about football, by the way, they could earn tickets. For what it's worth, women did much better than men in our staff competition, including the rules of football. But that was one way in which we could make it work. Also with our customers, they could gain tickets, and a number of legacy projects, which we can also talk about. So despite the fact that times are tough, we definitely wouldn't miss out on the opportunity.
So you would write that check now? Would you have the money to write that check now?
Yes, we would. Okay. Times are tough, but it's going to be incredible. And we're talking about all the economic realities about it. I think the experiential side, the pride of South Africa, the fact that it can pull South Africa together, that nation-building exercise is really something that we want to be part of.
Legacy projects, what do you mean by that? What are you doing? Are you building schools based on 2010?
Yes, we are, and those are arguably the non-commercial parts where we're involved. One of the big things that we did is we're building artificial pitches in communities that have no training facilities. So we've built 12 of these artificial pitches. We've also distributed 150,000 FIFA-accredited soccer balls. In fact, it's the largest collection of soccer balls the world has ever had together in South Africa, distributed to schools and kids and customers. So hopefully that they can gear up on their skills if it's not Bafana this time, which I hope it is. There are lots of people practicing out there, and then pretty soon we're going to do something interesting with the Vuvuzela. We want to make this a South African and African World Cup. They'll remember the noise.
Okay. Helen Zille, can you give me a number out of 10?
I can talk safely about Cape Town and somewhat more confidently about the Western Cape, not about the rest of South Africa at this stage. But sitting here now, looking at our plan and our deadlines now, I would say we're at about 8 out of 10. Okay. Obviously, these things can change because the deadlines are very tight and we follow them meticulously. But sitting here now, we're meeting our deadlines.
So you're positive about that?
I'm very positive, yes. It's good.
Are you excited?
Deadlines. I'm very excited. I usually get excited when we've completed a successful event. Right up to that point, I know that I'm responsible for a lot of things, and so I wait for the excitement till afterwards. But at the moment, I am focused.
You were the mayor of Cape Town. You obviously now have charge with the whole of the Western Cape. Is the impact on tourism going to be as significant as people say it will be? I mean, how is it going to fundamentally change the face of this region?
Well, it already is changing the face of this region just in terms of 12 billion rand of infrastructure investment, which would otherwise not have happened. So simply on that kind of cost-benefit analysis and the lasting impact of that kind of infrastructure, yes, it is changing the face of the region. I think what Michael has just said, which is very important, is that we're having infrastructure-led economic growth. The Deputy President said exactly that. And we didn't plan for a recession, obviously, but to be midway into a massive infrastructure development program, which is already budgeted for in the middle of a recession, is the best thing we could have asked for. And lots of people are being employed by that route. And if we can get the transport systems up and running...
Is that also your biggest concern?
It is our biggest concern, no question. It is our biggest concern because of the delays occasioned by stakeholders who aren't keen on change, although they could themselves benefit hugely by it. It is a major issue, no question.
You are also the leader of the opposition. I don't want to give you the opportunity to make cheap political points here, but could the government have done anything different or better?
The important thing to note is that we've had the best intergovernmental cooperation on this project compared to everything else. And one of the great legacies...
It's been a lot of love.
Well, you know, a lot of love, a lot of focus, a lot of attention, and some tension, you know. You can't get progress without a bit of tension. That is what South Africans often don't realize. If you ever have an argument with anybody, they think you're going backwards. Often that's the only way of going forwards, actually. So there have been some arguments, but I couldn't have had better support from the local organising committee, because I think they understood that every point I raised was a valid point, focused on ensuring the success of the World Cup. And I think the intergovernmental relations that we had between the city and the province, and between the city and the province and national, was a model for everything else. So I think it really underscores the point that Michael was making. When we have a deadline and when we have to deliver at world-class standards, we get our act together.
Legacy. I sometimes find it a very woolly word, because what does it really mean? How is a kid in Gugulethu, 5 years after the end of the World Cup, going to have his life or her life changed? I mean, what does it mean for people in the Western Cape who are not directly responsible with engaging with teams and with fans?
Well, the most important legacy for us in South Africa and for the rest of the continent is that we change the world's perception of what we're able to do. I think the world is still characterized by a lot of what they call Afro-pessimism, and we've got to change that to African. I always say African, we can do it just as well as anybody else can. And I think that that is our real legacy, to get rid of this perception that we can't get anything right, and to show that we can produce the best World Cup ever. I'm very interested to hear Danny saying that it's going to be FIFA's most profitable. That gives us a good lever to say to FIFA, put a bit more in here, you know, leave a bit of a better legacy. But I don't want to start a fight with FIFA here either. But certainly that is a good lever to do that. And I think if we do it on time, within budget, present a great experience, use it to mobilize unity and the vision of the Rainbow Nation, to use the phrase that we like to use in South Africa, that's the great legacy.
So it's more, for all of you, a lot of you, seems to be more about branding South Africa and also about national unity than it is about changing a kid's life in Gugulethu, in a sense of lasting impact.
Robin, you won't change a kid's life in Gugulethu unless we can change the world's perception of South Africa, unless we can understand that world class is where we need to be, unless we can put in those investments, bring down crime, improve transport infrastructure, improve all infrastructure, and extend that ethos to everything, including the fundamental taproot problem of South Africa, which is getting our education system right to produce children out of it with marketable skills to become part of an active economy as a world-class player in South Africa.
Danny, we talked in an interview that I did with you a few weeks ago. Kids from around South Africa were each given a Confederations Cup team to represent. The Western Cape was given Iraq to represent. At this inter-schools tournament, but it was really a mini Confeds Cup. The kids from the Western Cape who represented Iraq didn't even know where Iraq was or that there'd been a war there. The kids who represented Egypt didn't know Egypt was in Africa. Now, when you talk about education and about an impact of football on this country, that for me was a real wake-up call that a lot of this country, a lot of the kids here don't even know what is coming here. That there's a lot of work to be done, isn't there, particularly in the schools?
Well, our most fundamental problem and challenge, if you want a euphemism for the future, is getting our children properly educated. Reading, writing, calculating. Information literate, curious, with access. That is our fundamental issue. And creating the kind of framework as we're doing now to become a world-class player will only increase the pressure on us to ensure that our children come out of the schooling system, the education system, with the skills they need to use those opportunities competitively and to become world-class players. We've got this massive unemployment problem and this extreme skill shortage at the same time. And until we get that right, that's why I bang on about it all the time, we're not going to be able to make use of the legacies that the World Cup leaves.
Let's talk about legacy and kids. You run an NGO that teaches and coaches kids around the continent. Do you think, particularly, say, for an African child, not here in South Africa, someone in West Africa, how do they feel about this World Cup? Do they feel part of it?
I think some of them do. I mean, it's quite hard to say that all the African children in every village is even aware that it's going on. You know, I think if your team's doing well, there's lots of publicity about that. In Burkina Faso, for example, where we work, it's regarded as quite a very poor country. No one's really heard of it very much outside of, you know, the continent, but they're doing quite well at the moment. So I think there's a huge amount of interest and pride in the team, and that generates a huge amount of passion on the streets. And every village you go to has a goalpost, or there's a kid with a ball made out of a bottle. So, you know, people will play football with whatever they can get their hands on, whatever resources are available to them. And
or
the fact
an FNB
that
football.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, when we're talking about legacy, the issue of teaching these kids is a sort of, you piggybacking on 2010, and a lot of NGOs I speak to are using 2010 as a forum to try and give football and the lessons that football inculcate. What are they?
Well, I think it's a great tool. And that's what the reason we use football is it's a great tool for communication, because it's a universal language, because people love the sport, boys, girls, whoever they want to play. So you can use the passion and the interest in learning to play, being coached better, being in a team, etc., to engage young people who aren't necessarily even in the school system in learning life skills, in understanding very simple issues around maybe substance abuse or HIV/AIDS or sexual health. There's a range of different curriculums that we use in order to engage kids in that way. And it seems to be a way of getting people to debate things, discuss things in a non-threatening environment. And it's fun. I think that's the key. It's quite fun. People want to play. They get engaged in that. And that kind of takes people outside of a formal education system, which they might not feel they're included in anyway.
Okay. Let's also bring in, while we're talking about it, I just want to get the actual footballers themselves. There's Jomo Sono and Phil Masinga sitting here, two of South Africa's legend footballers. Bringing in South Africans and making them feel like they're a part of this World Cup. One of the biggest ways to do it is to make sure that the national team does well. Why is Bafana Bafana disappointing the fans so much, Jomo? Do you think they're going to get past the first round?
Yeah, I really believe they will go past the first round, because, you know, if you look at Korea, nobody gave the Koreans a chance of going through. And they had an advantage, the Koreans, because they had the 12th player, and the 12th player being defense. And I strongly believe that you can put up a bad team, terrible 11 players, but if they have a support, you know, and people cheering them and giving them, you know, that spirit to fight, I strongly believe that Bafana Bafana will surprise a few people.
Why? The fans across Africa, when we talk about legacy and we talk about the impact of 2010 for Africa, a lot of it's got to do with football and football players. How is it that the Didier Drogbas of this world play in European clubs, are heroes, but they come back to their local clubs and they just, the level of football is not the same? What is it, what would you change about African football?
I think if you look at some of the players who are playing in Europe, when they come back to the national team, they mix mainly with the local players. And the standard of the local player and the player who's playing in Europe is totally different. And it's either the European player has to adjust and drop down to the level of local players to be equal, or the local players have to try and reach out to Drogba standard. So the problem has been that they have to drop to the level of local players.
But the local players, there's been a lot of criticism. Does there need to be more infrastructure, more cohesiveness with African football in terms of local clubs and national teams?
Yeah, we definitely need to have that. But at the moment, you know, the infrastructure in Africa is not the same as in Europe. And, but if you look at what FIFA is doing now with the Goal Project, they're building soccer fields all over Africa. And that in future will help in the sense that some of us, we used to play, you know, even a place where cows can't even walk. But we managed to play football. And now with the facilities that are being plowed back after the 2010 World Cup, definitely, you know, football in Africa will improve. I mean, if you look now in the world, 20% of African players are big name stars. Yeah. And after 2010, with the legacy, we're looking at having our 50% of the African players playing in Europe. And that will definitely change the football in the continent in Africa.
Thank you. We've wrapped up this little bit. Is there anything you'd like to say?
You know, this country in 1956 produced a top-class footballer who went to play for Cardiff City in England and Heracles in the Netherlands and for Torino in Italy. And in its debut game in Italy, he scored 5 goals coming from South Africa in 1956 already. That's before Pele became a world-class footballer. And even today, Professor Kgalema offers 3 bursaries at university level to young stars from this country who are just capable of playing football.
So the talent is there, we know that.
Talent is there.
So why is Bafana number 72 on the world ranking?
The talent is there. That's one of the reasons why when I was asked to consider serving in government, I said no. I would rather be a talent scout for Bafana, yes, because I know that there's lots of talent across the breadth and length of this country.
Do you think the problem is we have a foreign coach? Is that a criticism that perhaps we need to look inwards and choose a South African coach? Well, no culture is really static. We got to always draw the best from the rest of the world and implant it into our own development systems. If we do that, I think South Africa can become. But the rugby players and the cricketers won on with South African coaches. Surely there needs to be more push to create a coach that the team and the fans can trust.
Yes.
Isn't that the first step towards getting up those rankings?
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you there. But what I'm saying is...
Is that your next mission as Deputy President?
The opportunities ought to be opened up for local coaches to advance and get advanced training technically so that they can keep abreast of the world, because development in various areas is uneven. You know, the Indians lead in the rest of the world in ICT. And so you got to draw that inspiration and lessons from the Indians wherever they are at this point in time and seek to improve on it, take it to higher levels. The same applies to football as well.
Okay. I just want to come back to the question of legacy. You know, we have 5 clear legacy outcomes besides the football, it's an obvious outcome. And you see the impact already. The kind of sponsorship revenue generated for South African football, the scene jumps in by 1,000%. Now we have more than 1 billion rands of sponsorship concluded. And that must go to the benefit of football. But first of all, it's an infrastructure legacy. After 2010, the infrastructure must be better. That is obvious, you can see that. The job creation that has been raised. In the initial investigation by Grant Thornton and Castle Feinstein, they came to the conclusion that will create about 159,000 jobs. The president is correct, it's over 415,000 jobs being created by infrastructure projects related directly to the World Cup and other infrastructure.
Is there going to be a nasty hangover after World Cup 2010 when these jobs?
Let me just tell you about the other
three more to go, sorry.
The third one is tourism. Okay. We want more than 10 million tourists by 2010. You know, we already have the big teams qualified, so I think we'll achieve that. England is very close, the Netherlands qualified, Brazil is coming closer, so if the big teams come, I think we'll achieve that. So tourism is important. And then nation building. The sport event, as we've seen in Germany. Germany was divided by a war. We were divided by legislation. After 2006, you had, for the first time in the east of Germany, Germans wrapping themselves in the German flag. They were just German again. So nation building, I think, is a key. And then it's about country branding, to build the brand essence of South Africa. And I think we have the platform. We're going to have more than 300 broadcasters being here for 30 days, like CNN and many others. And
we're here 365 days, so just a little plug.
Well, that will give us a platform to present many other things that goes on in this country. It's about this being a place for business and trade and investment and engagement.
So what about the hangover?
The post-use of the events.
Yeah.
The first thing we ask all of the host cities, we have a bank called the Development Bank of South Africa. And the Development Bank of South Africa evaluated all of those cities. We had 13, and we asked them to evaluate on 2 criteria, on the technical infrastructure in the city, in other words, the city's capacity to generate additional revenue, and the social economic indicators in the city. And based on that criteria, we then had a rank list. Instead of 13 host cities in the bid book, we settled at 9. And we asked the cities to integrate the World Cup in a plan. When you talk to Johannesburg, they will tell you about Vision 2020, Vision 2015. So clearly, the roads, the airport, and all the other infrastructure must have sustainable use beyond this event.
Because I'm sure for many of you, and many of the audience and many South Africans, they don't want this to be like a traveling circus, that once the circus is over, there's just sort of a parched piece of ground where the tent once stood. I mean, is there the danger of that? And how do you stop that happening?
Well, the tent called Greenpoint Stadium will stay. No one's going to demolish that, I can assure you. And I'm very excited by the plans going forward for a multi-purpose stadium that will bring every kind of event to Cape Town, be used for all sorts of developments, and be a catalyst for a lot of spin-offs. So that's going to be fantastic. Obviously, if we get the transport system at least started, then you add components over time. If you get enough to have a backbone for 2010 for what your needs are for that, then you have momentum going through to, in fact, establish a proper viable public transport system for the whole city. And all of these things are fantastic things if you can keep the momentum going. And of course, we must.
For you?
I can just add to that. Look, legacy thinking in general is a wonderful way to guide your life, whether you're running a business or a family. And I think legacy thinking is incredibly important. We're now focused on the 365 days when the kickoff's going to be. It's going to be great and exciting. But 40 days after that, the last goal's going to be scored. And what then? The one that I have to say economically one has to question is the stadiums themselves. And what we do with them, I think, will take some innovative thinking. I mean, one could be entertainment, another could be other World Cups, and I think we should try and go for them. But nearly every other element of investment that we make here is good for us. We have a backlog in roads, we need to build more roads. We have, I'm in airports pretty often in my life, and I always feel they're too full. So just upgrading the airports and what it can do for tourism is very important. Maybe one of the most important ones is, in fact, crime. Early this morning, I watched an overseas broadcast covering the 365 days, and they can't help themselves. They always have to focus on crime. We have such a unique opportunity to address not only the image of our country as crime-ridden, but the actual reality thereof. Now, I happen to believe that the event itself will be pretty crime-free. I think there's so much focus being placed on it. That doesn't mean that you won't find some soccer hooligan going into a dark alley in search of something illicit and getting a little bit more than he or she bargained for. That's likely to happen. But overall, I think this is going to be such a controllable World Cup that we're going to do well. But my fervent hope is that it's not just the World Cup, that it's actually crime in the entire country that we get down, and that we use that momentum, the extra 40,000 police, etc., to do something afterwards. Now, those would be the real legacies of the World Cup.
And for the kids that you come across?
Yeah, I think it has to go beyond infrastructure. Obviously, that's really important for an event like this because it's so big. But I think in order to have a legacy that's going to touch people in more remote places, you really need an emphasis on creating more coaches at grassroots level, community coaches who can get out into rural areas and work with young people and somehow generate funding for that. I know FIFA's got plans to set up Football for Hope centres across Africa, and that's fantastic. But again, a centre will only reach so many people. It doesn't always get out to the more remote areas. So I think it's a lot about creating more coaches, creating more interest in understanding the social good that football can deliver and engaging with people on that level and that kind of thing. For example, I was just thinking of a girl in Mali called Aminata who's going to benefit from this because Football for Hope have built a centre in Mali, and her team, which she's only joined last year because she was coached by one of our coaches, has now done very well in their local league. It's given her a huge amount of confidence, her self-esteem's gone up, and the plan is that there'll be a football festival in Alexandria for the final week of the World Cup tournament, which Football for Hope is coordinating, and her team are coming over to take part in that. Okay. So it'll be a fantastic opportunity for her to see another part of Africa, to mix with other people from the continent, and for her team, you know, to really understand what the World Cup can be about. And I think that should be the message. It's for young people and giving them a future, which gives them hope.
Okay. Any final comments before I ask you who you think is going to win? Danny?
No, I think I opened the session.
Yes,
perhaps the Deputy President was also a very good footballer.
Was
perhaps, he? Yes. So perhaps the Deputy President should close.
Who do you think is going to win if you were a betting man?
Bafana, yes. Bafana is going to win, yeah.
You can't say anything else. Michael?
I really hope it's Bafana, but as a gambling man, I think it's Spain's to lose.
Okay.
Well, I don't agree with my opposition number very often, but I always support the underdog, so I'm backing Bafana too.
It's got to be England.
Absolutely. And you, Nania?
Well, my responsibility is to make sure that every single one of the 32 teams have everything in place to win the World Cup.
Very smooth answer. Now, questions from you in the audience. I think the best way to do it is, I think let's just take 3 questions. The microphone's running around, and then we'll take answers. So, the lady in the white here.
Hi. My questions, one's for Danny and the other one for Helen Zille. Danny, I would like to find out, you mentioned that this has been the most profitable of World Cups for FIFA since its inception 100 years ago. Is this because Africa is paying a premium to host this event, and the sponsors having to pay much more than what the other countries have had to pay previously? And to Helen Zille, I would like to find out, Cape Town, as a host city, what are you doing to ensure that the benefits of tourism that will come from hosting this event does spread across and benefit the empowerment of those that were previously excluded from the economic enterprise of this industry? Thank you.
Well, you know that the bulk of the money is generated through the sale of broadcast rights. If you take the preliminary draw in Durban, now, the preliminary draws, and I've attended the preliminary draw since the 1994 World Cup in the United States, there hardly any interest other than the big broadcasts in the world. For that event, we had 200 broadcasters who wanted the show live. And so that preliminary draw was also the best ever in FIFA's history in Durban. We had the World Broadcasters Conference. We had 400 delegates in that broadcasters conference. the highest number of broadcast interests ever in any World Cup. So of course, the more broadcasters you bring on board, the more you generate from the broadcast rights fee, over 2.1 billion rand, billion US dollars from broadcast, sale of broadcast rights. So it's not money that is generated from us, but rather sale of the commercial rights and partners like FNB, broadcasters like CNN, Sky, and BBC, and all of the other broadcasters, and huge media interest in this World Cup. So I think we'll have the highest number of broadcasters, high number of commercial partners that want to be part of the event, and that is where the revenue is generated for FIFA. From our operations, FIFA has given us $423 million US dollars as a total grant to cover all our operations to deliver this event. So this event, in its operations, our salaries and everything else that requires from transportation, the logistics, the broadcast, the hospitality, everything is fully funded 100% by FIFA. So we get back $423 million US dollars, which is already in South Africa, and because he's a partner, took more than 500 million and invested there in FNB. Yeah, we already see the benefit of a huge foreign direct investment in this country of $400 million US dollars in the country.
Thanks, Nania. It's not nepotism.
It just, we have the same surname.
Oh, ho. That adds up. Robin, I think in any major event or development, one has to work out what is the government's role and what is everybody else's role, and how to be sure that everyone fulfills their responsibilities properly and adequately. Now, our role in government is to make sure that the planning is right, to enable the benefits to be spread widely. So you look, for example, at the location of not only the stadium, but all the practice stadiums, all the practice venues. You look at the transport infrastructure to all of them. You look at the fan parks and all of the infrastructure that goes around that. You look at tourism readiness. You make sure that what you as government have to do is done well and adequately to give the skeleton on which the private sector moves in and adds the flesh and the muscle. And that is imperative. Now, we do have parastatals, I would call them, like the Cape Town Routes Unlimited and other semi-autonomous agencies that are supposed to drive all of these issues, but my attention has been 99% focused on getting what we have to get right. That's going to create massive opportunities, for example, in social tourism. Now, I don't think it's the government's role to say, how can we create or focus or drive or steer those opportunities? Those opportunities are created if we do what we have to do correctly, and then enable the market players, and especially those who can see those critical gaps and niche markets, to move in and to take them through entrepreneurship and enterprise. That is the kind of ethos we're trying to establish in South Africa. So the government must do what government does really well. For example, developing Lookout Hill in Kgalema, and hope that it isn't vandalized too quickly, so in fact the infrastructure remains there for long enough to actually be a benefit. To ensure that we do all the partnerships with getting community markets ready and all of that sort of thing. But then it is up to the entrepreneurs to move in, to take the space, the finance institutions to back them, so we can use a big legacy project as being sustainable business and entrepreneurs that use the space of what government has got right to use their freedom to become sustainable.
Great. Okay, other questions? Okay. Oh. You in the front row and then you over there, so we'll take you.
Good morning and thank you. My name's Kevin Wellman. I work for a public relations firm, a multinational PR firm in Joburg. In my opinion, this is more a comment, and I'd love someone to address it. In my opinion, one of the greatest opportunities we have to create a legacy is really to the ability to change perceptions of South Africa and Africa in the next 365 days or next 400 days. I believe there's a great responsibility on all South Africans and anyone visiting our shores over the period of the Confed Cup in the next few weeks and next year, and that's to tell great stories to the rest of the world. I can't wait for the day to watch a CNN insert that doesn't concentrate on crime, that doesn't show shacks in down a back alley, that shows our great stadiums, that shows Greenpoint Stadium in Cape Town, that shows exactly what has happened. I've been fortunate enough to work lots on the F&B campaign and various other clients, and I go to Soccer City in Joburg every few months, and what is happening is absolutely incredible. It's absolutely tremendous. And I think the second responsibility, the second part of my comments, I believe there's a responsibility on local media to cover the positive stories, to cover the good news, because there is just so much. I listened to Danny Jordaan as opposed to Michael a while ago, and he talked about South African media cover over the last 5 years the concept of Plan B more than anybody else. That I think is nonsense. We've got a year left to go, and there's a responsibility to tell great stories, and our time is now to tell the stories. Okay. So it's a comment. Thank you.
Behind you. Got to pass it behind you.
Thank you very much. My name is Super Mandiwanzira. I'm from Zimbabwe. The organizing committee in South Africa has been able to sell this World Cup not just as a South African event, but as an African World Cup. But what really is happening on the ground in terms of ensuring that the majority of the Africans who have no access to radio, who have no access to television, are actually able to watch this event on the continent? And Danny has just spoken about the rights in terms of television rights. Is there any dispensation for African broadcasters who don't have a lot of resources so that they're able to access the signals which can be rebroadcast or at least redistributed even to people in the rural areas during this World Cup?
Do you want to answer that, or does anyone want to comment on the first comment?
It's up to you.
You go for it. Answer that question. I think it was an interesting one.
Well, you know that the World Cup always has been on free-to-air. And FIFA has a policy. In fact, the only country that pays for broadcast rights fee on this continent is South Africa. The others are getting the feed for free. The African Union of Broadcasters had a meeting with FIFA, so that will be the case. But beyond that, I think what was discussed, there was a meeting of the African Union of Broadcasters in Johannesburg also. It's not just looking at the feed, but looking at the improvement and investment in broadcast infrastructure on the continent, because that is a bigger issue. It's the quality of the broadcast on the continent. And I think from a football point of view, we've seen tremendous changes in Ghana, for example. The introduction of the investment in broadcast infrastructure and the improvement that it has brought about. So in many other countries, there's a strong engagement in improving that. As far as access is concerned, there's always the option of public viewing. We said that 5 African teams will qualify. And in those 5 African countries, we want to have a fan park. So if Ghana comes, and in Accra, Ghana, people must assemble there. Or if Cote d'Ivoire comes in Abidjan, or any of the other teams that qualifies. I'm merely talking about how these teams stack up at the moment. But that is an engagement, and the SABC has also been involved. So we will continue to work with the broadcasters on those 2 fronts. 1, access, but 2, also the quality of the infrastructure on the continent. And that's a bigger issue.
Okay, you sir over there, and Peter in the back there as well. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Ahmed Kassam. I'm from the NEPAD E-Africa Commission, which is the ICT task team for Africa under NEPAD. I just want to answer also respond to the question that has been raised by the person from Zimbabwe, and also support the initiative. You know, we have under 70 million television sets across the continent. And even if the World Cup was held in the next 365 days, you will disenfranchise a major population who cannot reach the screens. The experience of the 2010 World Cup, you know, we've taken it from the approach of what is required from within the countries. What do they want? And as he rightly said, that the viewing of the World Cup is the main thing. In the 2006 World Cup, people traveled hundreds of kilometers to get to the television screen. The project that the NEPAD, the Africa Commission, has initiated is to take the experience of the 2010 World Cup to the rest of the continent. The challenge is to try to put the screen not in 5 countries, but every country. It is a big challenge because the screens aren't cheap, they're expensive. The other way to do it is also to look at a sustainable infrastructure of linking it to tourism and bringing more people not only into Southern Africa, but into Mali, into Niger, into Mombasa in East Africa, and other places. I think there is a lot of coordination that's required within the organization, within FIFA, within NEPAD, within the African Union, and the countries. We certainly have the support from the countries. It is now probably to get it done to the next level.
Like that.
Hi, I'm Peter Fabricius from Independent Newspapers. I think this would be a question directed at you, Danny Jordaan, if I may. There's been a lot of emphasis on nation building, which is as perhaps one of the biggest objectives and hoped for legacies of the World Cup. As we all know, in this country, soccer has been largely a black sport, rugby largely a white sport. Do you see a potential for really closing that gap sports-wise? And are you already seeing some of that? Are you seeing, for example, more white kids playing soccer, or, I mean, not only kids, but at different levels?
Well, I think that is the perception. The reality is different. We have 2.1 million white football fans in this country. The problem is they're walking with a shirt of Man United, of Arsenal, of Chelsea, and so on. The body is in South Africa, their minds and heads is somewhere else. And that's the issue. I know that and we've seen that. In 2003, we played England in Durban. I think England matched us in terms of support in that stadium. And that's where the issue is. I think in this country, across the board, both black and white, football is the majority sport. But we have to have sessions to convert those Man U and Liverpool supporters and Tottenham Hotspurs, as we've seen. We played Tottenham Hotspurs here. It was full. When Man U comes, it's sold out. So there is the highest number, or from a television point of view, the biggest consumer of English football in the world is South Africa. It's the only country in the world where you can watch live 5 English Premier League games over a weekend. It's the highest consumption of English football anywhere in the world. So I have no doubt that we have a massive base of football supporters. We must convert them, and that's where the challenge is.
Mr. Deputy President, do you have anything to say to these comments, particularly about broadcasting and access, and just making this tournament available to people across the continent?
Well, firstly, I think the concept of fan parks ought to be popularized in the rest of the continent to ensure that those of the soccer fans who are unable to travel to South Africa can access these games.
So more than just in the 5 countries that Danny...
That's right. I think it's got to be spread across the continent, actually.
I mean, how would you do that? I mean, is that something, does the local organising committee have a say in that? I mean, does government need to lobby for that? How does that get done?
Well, from a practical point of view, 2 South African broadcasters broadcast into the continent. They're both SABC and SuperSport. So it's a question of the signal. And I'm sure that if the government sits down with the SABC and SuperSport and deal with the issues of the signal distribution across the continent, and those matters are resolved, then there's no issue.
It means government sitting down with the SABC, sir. Yeah. Did you hear that?
Yeah. I heard that very well.
Okay, we've got the front row because you're in front of me. There are two of you gentlemen there.
Yes, I'm also from NEPAD. My name is Henry Chasea, and we should say that this event has been the trigger for the infrastructure that's being built now. Submarine cables, many of them being built along the shores of the continent, both in the east and in the west. And also the work we're doing in NEPAD in trying to get the broadband infrastructure across the borders within the continent. Now, we've just finished a study of East and Southern Africa, in which we find that about 60% of the infrastructure required, broadband infrastructure required between countries exists. So we have to build some more and also have a network that will distribute these signals across these countries. So work is going on, but a lot has been done so far. And this event has been very important in triggering this.
You've just touched on an important issue, is the issue of broadband and IT and connectivity. I mean, that's another way that people are concerned about how people are going to watch this on the internet. I mean, are you worried about that, the connectivity?
Yes, of course. That's one of the issues that we're trying to attend to through the undersea cable to ensure that there is that kind of connectivity and access to information.
But it's not there now, is it?
It's not there yet, but we can fast track it to ensure that by the time of 2010 FIFA World Cup, most of the villages in the continent have access to these games. That's, you see, the AU Ministers of Sports and Recreation were tasked by the AU heads of governments to work on key legacy projects, and this is one of them.
Okay. I'm just going to stand up because I think I might be ignoring the people behind me. Any questions? Sir, yes. And there. Oh, sorry, you do, okay. We'll come to you.
Ferruh Gürtaş from Intel Corporation. It was mentioned that education is going to be one of the legacies of the World Cup, and there will be some investments. And at the end, World Cups come and go. Even if we have the best final, people will forget it after some time. But if the legacy, especially in education, can create a long-term impact, I think then the World Cup will leave a trace on the continent, a long-term trace. So I want to learn what are the plans in education, what kind of investments will go, and who is going to be leading those efforts.
Who wants to take that question? Let me take the part of it.
Well, the government has prioritized education, and a new, in fact, the Ministry of Education was split into two. There's now a dedicated ministry focusing on basic education to ensure that the schooling system is revamped and improved upon, and that the quality of the students who come through that schooling system can provide the basis for acquisition of better skills for this country. So that is a priority of not only as part and parcel of the World Cup, but for the government itself. In the next 5 years, that's a priority.
And you also wanted to say something?
Let me say that without detracting at all from the importance of international sports events, I often wish we'd put this much effort into getting our education system right, because that is really going to be the make or break for the future of our country. But if you look at some of the knock-on effects from the World Cup, I think that broadband is going to potentially transform education, because it's simply a fact that we're not going to get excellent teachers of the kind of commitment that we require and dedication into our schools, especially not for the amount of money that teachers are now earning and the alternatives available to them. And so we have to find ways through broadband of getting massive multiplier effects of the few good teachers that we've got and put them into every classroom through technology. And those kinds of things are absolutely critically important for us. But I think also the mindset change. To get 2010 right, we've had to have massive public-private partnerships that have had to work. And the state has had to understand that it has a specific role and that the private sector has another role. And if we all fulfill our roles adequately, we can reach a result that is better than if we try to crowd each other out of the space. Now, we've got to understand that in education as well. And we have got to ensure that we have deadlines, have benchmarks, and hold each other accountable to achieving them, and not allow things to hobble on from year to year, from decade to decade. And that mindset shift around what has to be achieved to be world class in education is something that we need to take from the World Cup. I am seized with the challenges that face education, and we will certainly be driving broadband as one of our priority projects, not only for the World Cup, but precisely because of the impact it can have in education.
Okay. Yeah, you were behind me.
Yeah, my name is Samburu Washiko with the African Leadership Academy. I wanted to follow up on what Helen Zille was talking about, going back to the presentation around the World Cup being a really fantastic opportunity to transition from Afro-pessimism to African. I really enjoyed that, and I was just wondering, in your capacity as a former mayor, but also in the current capacity that you occupy, obviously, as the head of a really important province in South Africa, do you see an opportunity for the kinds of initiatives that you're conducting in Gugulethu, Khayelitsha, for example, being transported into other marginalized communities across the continent? I'm referring to cities such as Nairobi, where you have one of Africa's most sprawling slums, in Kibera and Mathare. It strikes me that you might have insights and experiences that could really have impact across the continent. I work very closely with the community in Diepsloot, and we're already enjoying quite a lot of support from F&B there. And my hat is off to people like Michael Jordaan. I'm just wondering how this can actually be used to further leverage the talents, the passion, the really strong interest that exists in these communities across the continent. Your thoughts on that we really appreciate.
Well, we have got wonderful projects in Khayelitsha that are partnerships between various donor governments, this government and the private sector, and they're working very well with NGOs. So the concept of public-private partnerships is absolutely critical. And while I have stressed that in the South African context, government has a specific role to play, but can't cover every part of the holistic input that has to be focused on to make any major project work, I want to say about the rest of our continent that unless we get an understanding of why states have failed to do their job, and unless we come to grips with the concept of the shell state, where it's all the style and the pomp and the ceremony, but none of the real substance of service delivery, we're not going to be able to replicate anything. Because we have to understand that each player has a role, and the role of the state in Africa has to be looked at very carefully, the role of democratic accountability, the role of changing governments peacefully through the ballot box, and the role of civil servants in implementing a process without any corruption and focusing on delivery so that the state is doing its functions to address the basics, and then those partnerships work. The big problem in the rest of the continent is this phenomenon, not universally, one can't generalize, but in many parts of this continent, called the shell state, where the state is really a shell of style, and the substance has been taken out of it. And unless we address that problem, partnerships like this can't work, because they require a public sector that is functional to make them work.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. I just want to thank all our guests. It's been fascinating, and of course, good luck to everybody who's involved in 2010.